sort of normal. Those of you who are just arriving, we do have some treats in the lobby there, so help yourself. But anyway, we'd like to welcome you all to this. The TOPS, for those who may or may not be familiar, is a Food for Peace funded award that is composed of a consortium of Save the Children as the Prime, Mercy Corps, Food for the Hungry, the Core Group, and Tango International. Each of those members have sort of a lead technical specialty, but we all share across the board the things that each of the organizations knows and does. So it's a pretty broad range of skills and talents that get applied in response to the kinds of needs that are expressed by you in the implementing community, those who are carrying out the development food assistance projects in the various parts of the world, and of course who are faced and challenged by some of the reporting requirements we need to carry out. And despite a stunning lack of interest in anything called indicators, and we just really had to beat you people to get an interest and stirred up about talking about indicators, we decided to have this event anyway. So we're really happy to have you here, and we're very pleased to have Arif Rashid to lead this. Arif, for those who may not know, was originally with the TOPS program as the Tango representative on M&E, and he helped get us started down this path. And he's brought, I think, an amazing sense of perception and attention to detail, but certainly a lot of new ideas and new ways of using information, data, evidence, and so on. So in any case, we're here for a couple of reasons. One is that we conducted a kind of a consultation amongst all the stakeholders saying, what would you like to talk about if you had another one of the consultations that we have been routinely working with Food for Peace to conduct. These consultations bring the Food for Peace staff, relevant staff together, and frequently the top management with implementers from the implementing community to talk about ways forward on programming, how to solve some problems, how to come up with new ideas, and so on. And amongst those ideas that were presented, indicators rose quite high on the chart, despite what I said a little earlier. And it's consistently been an interest expressed by all the parties. It's a very complex area. It's subject to, I think, a lot of different approaches and certainly a lot of different uses. And today what we're here to do is to talk about the challenges that everybody faces, both the donor and the implementing community, around indicators, and then also to begin to share some mutually acceptable, mutually understood solutions to some of these challenges. So it's going to be an opportunity to get down and work closely with your colleagues and with your peers from the Office of Food for Peace in monitoring the evaluation. And we look forward to coming out with some really strong and jointly shared suggestions, consensus, and solutions at the end. So anyway, good luck. Enjoy your day. We have, as I say, we have goodies out on the hall. The restrooms are out in the elevator lobby, so you need to go out through the door. And if you can't get back in because you don't have a fab, just wave at the person on the reception desk. They'll let you in. So anyway, thank you, and back to Lori.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. First off, I'd like to encourage all of you to sit down. The idea is table of Food for Peace and PBO communities. So Mara, Holly, Scott, come on in, take a seat, fill up these tables. Yeah, I want to reiterate, it's really wonderful to see such commitment. This particular consultation took a while to put together and just find a date that worked for everyone, but we are really, really grateful for your commitment. We have how many folks online?
We have 13.
We have 13 folks online. For those of you online, we have maybe 20 people in the room right now. It's a lovely mix, great showing by Food for Peace. We have food security directors here, we have M&E managers, we have a lot of folks all over the globe online. And when at registration, I'm not sure who all is here, but at the registration roster showed that every single country where Food for Peace is currently funding a development program has somebody represented, somebody participating in this consultation. So thanks to all of you for that. As Mark mentioned, we had a survey noting your priorities. And following up on that survey, when this was identified as the top priority, we dug a little deeper. We conducted interviews with the M&E task force and with a number of you individually three topics rose to the surface. And many topics were raised, and you all received the synthesis. But the three topics that kept bubbling to the surface were the number of indicators, how data are used, and implementing partner involvement in the baseline studies and final evaluation. We won't get a chance to cover the other topics that were raised in this short amount of time, but we hope to really dig into these three issues today. And of course, we encourage you to, call up your M&E representative if you have specific questions. They're your friends. We're all here in this together. So if you have a specific question, we don't always have to wait for a consultation to get that answered. TOPS consultations take a lot of forms. Sometimes we have Food for Peace coming and just getting input on the RFA or just getting input on the new indicators. Sometimes PBOs are just there to ask questions. So this consultation is a specific type. It's one we've done for the APS and also the PrEP. We want to gain a better understanding of the challenges that both parties are facing. And we specifically want to take some time, once we understand these challenges, to sit down together and brainstorm some solutions. Think about what could we do? How could we make these processes more efficient? That said, of course, Food for Peace can't make any decisions here today. They can take your ideas, your wonderful ideas, if they're fledgling, if you've been thinking about them for a long time. Hopefully some are way out of the box, but we won't ask for a commitment today because they've got to go back and discuss this internally. So we're just very pleased to have them here, and it just shows a continued commitment to ask the PBOs their opinions about how to improve processes. So give yourselves all a hand, those of you online as well. Please, give yourself a hand. Logistics, I think most of you have found the bathroom, which is in the hallway when you've just exited the elevator. There's a little touchdown room. If you need to take a phone call, I ask that you please go outside of the consultation, take that phone call in the lobby here or in the touchdown room, which is just to your left as you go down the hall. Let's see. I think unless there are any immediate questions about the basic structure of the consultation, we can get started with session one. Does anybody online have questions right off the bat? Okay. Anybody in the room? All righty. As I mentioned, we conducted a number of interviews before pulling this event together. And in those interviews, as well as just in general forums, awardees have stated that numerous indicators have had an impact on budgets, on staff motivation, on data collection responsibilities, sometimes even on beneficiaries, the logic being that we've got so many indicators, we spend less time on programming. Others have reported that it's not really the number of indicators that is the problem, but it is the level of disaggregation, so multiple layers and levels and so forth. So today, I really want you to get more specific. We will start this session hearing from the IPs. We want to understand specifically how is the number of indicators affecting XYZ. If it's about time, try to get a grip on that time. Don't say, oh, it takes so much time to do this. Please state, my staff are spending X amount of time on XYZ. If we're going to dig into the root of this concern, we really need to understand the specifics. So Food for Peace's role in this first part of the session is to listen, ask clarifying questions. If something is we need a little more information to understand the problem. We'll then turn it over to Food for Peace, who want to share a bit about some of the indicators where we really don't, we'll see these large posters here, there's no negotiating power. As we know, Food for Peace reports to higher levels of bureaucracy. And so for some indicators, it's just not in the scope of their control. So before we start moving into solutions, we get a mutual understanding of what indicators are beyond Food for Peace negotiating power, and we'll zero in on the indicators for which they do have some control. And Arif is here to explain that and also share a bit about indicators, the TOC, the IPTT, and the log frame and that relationship. So that comprises this first session. And I think I'll just put it to you. This will be our icebreaker. How about, how many folks in the room, Food for Peace, I'm asking you as well, how many folks in the room are concerned about the number of indicators for Food for Peace funded development projects? Be honest. It's okay, this is safe space, right? This is a safe space. Online, do a little click to vote if you're there. We have, I don't know, maybe not quite half of the room. Okay. How many is there, and how about online?
We have a couple people. Yep.
Okay. Is there anyone here who feels that there are not enough indicators to properly measure some areas? I actually have to join this camp. Okay. Well, let's get to some specifics. And I'm going to, oops, I forgot one bit of logistics. We have a large group online, so even though we are in a small room here, I'm going to ask that you wait to speak until you have a microphone to be sure that those online can hear you. So who'd like to kickstart this? Who would like to share a specific concern about too many or too few indicators? I'm going to start categorizing them, taking notes on the sticky notes, and then we will do some solution seeking later. So I'm turning it over to Megan Bolden, Save the Children.
Hi. I think to frame this the right way, I think that some of the older programs that are coming to the end of their cycle now had less required indicators and more required, if applicable, indicators. And I've seen those teams have had an easier time managing than some of the newer programs, let's say awarded in the last 2 or even last year, that have IPTTs that have over 1,500 lines. And what is the problem with that from my perspective? It's not just the management of data collection and analysis and data use. It's the ownership of what they're supposed to move the needle on as a team. The technical team can't even talk about what it is that they're supposed to be achieving and what they're going to be measured on. They get intimidated by these long lists such that they don't care about moving the needle on anything. They just care about their technical work at some point. And the indicators have become this thing that they have to do annually. And that's a shame. But I think
for clarification purposes, Megan, you're speaking specifically of the RIA, okay, baseline inline, or strictly annual monitoring?
The complete IPTT.
Okay.
So an IPTT may have an overall tab, then may have an annual monitoring tab, and then may have a baseline endline tab. The baseline endline, you're lucky if the team, I support multiple programs, so I'm not going to call anyone out, but you're lucky if the baseline endline the team has even looked at and understands how it was analyzed and what it means for it vis-a-vis their own local knowledge. The annual monitoring indicators, which while the tab is less, with all of the disaggregate information, still becomes, in some cases, more than a few hundred lines worth of data. And it's very hard to know which targets you're supposed to be seeking and which things you're prioritizing to move the needle on when it's that overwhelming.
Okay, so if I could just sort of, I'm going to always just try to winnow it down to a sticky note here. We're talking about affecting the ownership of achievement. We're talking about data management and determining what to prioritize. Is that, I miss anything? Okay, anybody else? Anyone online? Let's go to our online community.
Well, they didn't have much. I think they're still thinking, but they wanted to ask if people could share their name and organization.
Before speech.
like we did with Megan.
But no questions from online. Sure, and as introduced, that was Megan Bolden, Save the Children. And are any next speakers? Anybody like to share? Let's hear from some of you who stated we'd like to see more indicators in certain areas. Lisa? Lisa Coonan, do you mind if I introduce you, CRS? And I can do this while I'm passing the mic and make use of time.
Okay. While we also have concerns with the large volume of indicators required in RIA, there are times when there are things that we need to measure, and it's difficult to work them in among all the rest that is required. There's also a concern, we share the concern about the lack of grasp of baseline and end line, and sometimes the ability to insert something that we feel we need to measure into the baseline and end line. And because of the way joint midterms are happening, an ability to get a grasp on those baseline and end line indicators somewhere during the course of implementation so that we actually know whether we're moving that needle or not.
And just for clarification purposes, you feel there needs to be more food for peace required for RIA indicators or more custom indicators?
I think that we need room for not an overwhelming number, but a few more custom indicators that could be incorporated in baseline and end line.
Great. Thank you for clarifying. Next. Nestor.
The concern is more the required if applicable. Sorry, Nestor Mogollón from Ado International. The problem is that the required if applicable is so large, the criteria, that you ending up having all the indicators in the list. And I don't think that should be the case. So I think we need to work on that one, the required if applicable, because right now the spectrum is so large that when you start selecting, you ended up putting all the indicators that are in the list. That is the problem, I think.
And can you tell us a little bit more about how specifically that impacts your programming? What aspects of programming?
Well, because the problem is that because the criteria is so large that you ended up with so many indicators, I think you can ending up with the same problem that data management, the analysis, and all this kind of stuff. But also, at the same time, a lot of indicators that used to be on the monitoring side now becoming just in baseline and in line, and you ending up not having anything that actually tracked. And waiting until mid-thread or final when you cannot do anything to move the needle. So we need to have some indicators that are in baseline that we can track on monitoring so that we really know among our beneficiaries how the needle is moving, not waiting until we have a population-based survey that when I don't have anything to do anymore. Because it's already 5 years down the line, and so I cannot do anything. So I think that is something that is lacking to actually help me to track the progress of my indicators among my beneficiaries.
Okay, so I'm going to always try to synthesize this so I'm sure I get you right and we are in agreement in the room. You spoke about the large number specifically of RIA indicators is creating a problem for data management, similar to Megan. You also were aligned to Lisa that we want room for more custom indicators at baseline and line. Is that correct?
No baseline and line. And the monitoring, because a lot of baseline and then line is just population-based, but it doesn't give anything for beneficiaries. But I think the main point was the criteria required if applicable. It's too large that you ending up with so many indicators.
Okay. Can I just get a reading from those of you online? I'm going to use my drama voice so you guys can keep the mics, and if online, if you can't hear me, let Holly and Adrian know. Can we just take a reading online and in the room? How many are in agreement with the challenge of data management and the IPTT? Okay, we've got a pretty large body in here, and we'll give online some time to respond. How many are in agreement that the number of RIAs is too large and the criteria often means all these indicators are included because everything seems to be applicable? Okay. All right. And then this was a concern that also came up in early interviews about baseline endline indicators that we want to use. We need to be monitoring them because we don't understand progress if we're not monitoring those specific indicators that were moved out of annual monitoring. How many people are concerned about that issue? Okay, Lisa gets a double vote. Lisa's stuck in the ballot box over there. And online, do we have some comments? Could you share them, please, Adrienne? Yes.
So TD from CRS said that I am also concerned with the BLFE indicators on agriculture value chain practices as the module suggested for survey data collection are with leading questions, and hence we do not get valid estimates, ending up with high BL values for these indicators.
Okay. So good, not really, okay, not quite about the number of indicators, but certainly a valid point. Okay.
Can you repeat it one more time? Yeah, we don't. I am also concerned with the BLFE indicators on agriculture/value chain practices as the module suggested for survey data collection. Are with leading questions, and hence we do not get valid estimates, ending up with high BL values for these indicators.
Can you go back to him and ask him or her what kind of leading question?
And actually, I'm sorry, but as a moderator, I'm going to jump in and say thank you, TD, for your input, and we'll take note of that, but I want to keep the conversation focused on number of indicators. Right, not the construction of indicators per se, but we certainly will take note of that and pursue it later. Sure, Diana?
Hi, Diana Succo, Fanta Project. So I'm not an implementer, but I sit on the sidelines and I'm well acquainted. I'm involved in the baseline, final evaluations, and in annual monitoring. But I guess when you asked the question, Lori, how many people think there are too many, how many people think there aren't enough indicators, I was one of the ones who put my hand up for the first one. I thought there were too many. But now that I rethink it, I think there are too many and too few. And there's an opposing tension between that. I think from the standpoint of, well, when you develop a great theory of change, and we all know how complicated our theory of change diagrams look like, and we know that to be able to monitor it properly, we have to have indicators at every level to be able to see what's happening. And that, by definition, means, particularly because we have multi-sectoral programs, that we're going to have a lot of indicators. There's sort of no escaping from it. But then there's the tension on the other side. Well, then that presents an enormous burden on PBOs, at least for the annual monitoring suite, to collect and utilize and set targets for and disaggregate and so forth. So I don't know how to solve that tension, but I'm sort of thinking that probably the need for a lot of indicators is not going to go away, but maybe there are other ways to solve it, and that relates to minimizing burden on target setting and disaggregates and target setting for disaggregates and blah, blah, blah. But I know that's a different topic. I just want to say that I think there are equally well arguments on both sides, and they're legitimate.
I would agree. Jacob.
So this is Jacob Gray with ACDI VOCA. I'm coming at this more from the design side. I don't provide a whole lot of support to the M&E team, so I'll let the field folks who are online talk to that. From the design side, looking at this, I understand what Megan was saying, in that from my perspective, there there are too many, and there's not enough. What I see is missing, and maybe these are some of the baseline and the end lines, is some of the sort of more systemic change indicators. So a lot of the indicators that we have here are sort of stop the bleeding indicators. And that's fine. We want to be doing that. But then in the long run, after 5 years, we want to see systems in place that provide better services so that the next time around, we don't need as many stop the bleeding indicators. So I'm looking for, and I think we kind of got there with the adaptive capacity and the absorptive capacity indices, but I think that I'm not convinced that we get enough granular learning out of those to be able to say, wow, we're really seeing improvements in the health delivery system in terms of leadership, in terms of reach, but we're missing it in terms of community local systems for moderating resilience or something. So I feel like I'm missing some of those. And I think in terms of the design side, what it means is that when we then design, we go really into the details, into the weeds on trying to get to how many households and how all of these to solve that level. But then we remove our sort of lens of, wait, how are we changing the system? And so I think the design gets slanted towards one and at the cost of the other just because we don't have the indicators.
Does this resonate with other folks in the room? Okay, we see some head nods. Okay. Let's take a comment from online.
So Rodwell Sibanda from CRS said that a high number of indicators also means bigger. A high number of indicators also means bigger questionnaires, and I think this compromises the quality of the data collected.
Okay. Great job there of a very specific example. Thank you.
Is that baseline or annual monitoring?
Yes.
Which?
Both.
Baseline.
So anybody else concerned that larger questionnaires can compromise data quality? Okay. Kate?
No, I was just agreeing with him about the lack of looking at systems level change.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? We heard a lot of comments in these pre-interviews about budget, staff motivation, data collection, and in those terms, I'm guessing we are just talking about the annual monitoring indicators and the routine monitoring. So can anybody provide some more details about how the number of indicators is impacting budgets or staff motivation or data collection activities?
I'm just back from hearing from all of my Food for Peace DFAP colleagues, my CRS DFAP colleagues, for a week in Johannesburg. And one of the things that we talked about was the sheer volume of data to be analyzed makes it a difficult undertaking. And there's less attention paid to really what comes out of the analysis and what to do with it, because the focus is on getting to a number that we can put into a report. There's also an issue of, for our annual monitoring, the seasonality of it and the time between the collection of the data and the preparation of the annual results report, which is very short, and therefore there's really not time to reflect sufficiently to add more analytical value to that report and to the next year's changes in programming.
Okay, so if I captured that correctly, the volume of data to be analyzed limits the time that you can use the data for learning and adaptation. And okay.
And feedback to the community.
Okay. Do we have another comment online?
Yeah. We have a couple. I'm gonna talk about a couple of them, but to the last point, thank you. Erin Graber from PCI agreed yes for annual monitoring beneficiary surveys, that they require a huge amount of staff time and resources to conduct those surveys. We also had a couple comments about theory of change. Weber Jose from Save the Children said even though it might be needed to define a lot of indicators to get a better understanding of the theory of change, that he would suggest to make sure that we select the most relevant ones. And Rafiq had also said we may need to be more focused during theory of change development.
I'm Subodh from Food for the Hungry. This is based on our very recent experience in Ethiopia, where we were moving away from the annual beneficiary monitoring service since we didn't want to do that. But that means you have to have beneficiary registration, which we didn't even think about while writing the proposal, which was almost a year back. And so when actually we started doing it, we realized it takes a lot of time, cost, which was not budgeted, and takes staff time. Because that's the prerequisite to build all the other indicators on the annual monitoring. So it basically implicates the timing and our budgets, which we had actually overlooked while writing that during the proposal stage.
Do you have any clarifying questions? Do you have any questions you want to ask? So one more. I'm sorry, Megan. Another comment from Megan.
Sorry, Megan Bolden from SAVE. Just on the staff motivation question, from recent preps that have just been prepared for fiscal year 18, I just want to share some feedback on the staff motivation around annual monitoring indicators. I actually had a few technical staff who are tech leads say to me, am I supposed to be excited by telling you the number of people that have adopted a practice or that have changed their behavior? I don't know if they've changed it in a good way. I don't know if they've adopted the practice correctly. It's hard for us to get really excited and say, yes, our prep has this new revised target and we're going to meet this target. That's not what we're shooting for, Megan. That's not the purpose of this program. And there was a long discussion on what's missing in terms of indicators and the motivation that staff need of what they're supposed to be delivering in terms of quality. And I don't have the answer for it right now. That's part of the missing indicators, but I think that the annual monitoring indicators, if you look at this list, there's very few things that motivate people because these are not getting at the why, the rationale of why they do it. So in year 3 of a program or year 4 of a program, the team at some point is like, okay, 100 kilometers versus 150 kilometers, like that doesn't excite us. What excites us is what those kilometers did for improving people's lives. But they don't have any way of telling that story or setting a target for that story because that's all been set in the baseline end line and they have no gauge on where that is.
Okay, thank you so much, Megan. One more question.
Yeah.
Okay, just take one more comment and then any clarifying questions from Food for Peace.
And this is just from TD relating to program staff roles, not only for analyzing but also for collection of data, which is done by program staff and volunteers who spent more time on collecting the data versus actual program field support.
Okay. So, all right. I have a quick, Mara?
Yeah, this is Mara from Food for Peace. Megan, I just want to ask a clarifying question or two. So the first question I have is you had said that your staff member had asked about or had commented that they don't know if the beneficiaries are adopting the correct practices. But isn't that part of implementation is if you're introducing a practice, you want to make sure that the people are adopting the correct practice? So I'm confused why that individual feels that he or she can't investigate that the participant is actually doing what the project wants them to do. That's my first question. And then I would disagree that, and I would disagree in the difference between 100 and 150 kilometers and that story in between, because the annual results report, and maybe this is the difference in the roles of what M&E people are doing versus those who are writing the annual results report, but if there's a really great story in the development of that road, there's a spot for it in the annual results report. That's a success story, or that contributes to the achievement of an outcome across various paths of the theory of change. So I don't know if I'm not understanding what you're saying, or if perhaps this is something that the individual hasn't thought of as a way of including the success.
So we're not going to, I'm just taking all of this down, and we do have some time to work on solutions.
Is that too specific of a clarifying question?
Pardon?
Was that too specific of a clarifying question?
No, it was noted, and I think it's yeah, okay. It was noted. I don't think we can get into that's another topic that I think you can discuss, is what are the reasons that staff are not, participating in a learning agenda? Why are they not motivated to collect anything outside of the M&E plan? It might be, that's another discussion, and a very valid one. It's something that did not come up, and I'd like you to think about it, is I'm wondering how staff capacity meshes with the number of indicators. So as we move on through the consultation, I would like your input on the degree to which you feel that sometimes this number of indicators is a problem because of, or could be a problem because of capacity. I know we didn't get to everyone. There are note cards on the table, and if you ever have something we didn't get to, please put it on a note card, give it to me. I'll be synthesizing things during break for our solution-oriented discussion. Also, if you have an anonymous question, if you have something you just don't want to ask out loud, you can write that question on a card and give it to me. So at this point, we're going to move on and turn it on over to Arif. As you know, Food for Peace is beholden to higher levels of bureaucracy, and so there are, they may not be able to make adjustments to all indicators. And even if we're all in the room in agreement on some areas, Food for Peace reports to somebody. So I want Arif to take some time to explain where Food for Peace does and does not have negotiating power. And folks online, you have several attachments. They replicate the posters in the room. So if you'll take some time, I turn the mic over to Arif to open your attachments. Arif, I'll pull the screen up.
Thank you. Yeah. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Thanks to TOPS for organizing such a great event. I know that TOPS has been asking, particularly Lori Starr has been asking for quite a while to organize this workshop, and we were delaying. The reason we were delaying because we are in the process of finalizing the global food security indicators that the whole USG is working on. So we thought that once we finalize, and then Food for Peace will adjust its list of indicators based on that, then we will hold this. But finally, we were convinced that because it's taking such a long time, it's a good idea to have this meeting. So thank you. Thanks to TOPS, as well as thanks to all of you for coming. So just for our understanding, I want to reiterate, but first, before I go there, I would like Food for Peace M&E team to stand up so that, because that's right there is a story. Yeah, please.
It is a great story.
So the reason I wanted that, in 2013, when I joined, Food for Peace predates USAID. And I am the first M&E advisor Food for Peace ever hired in 2013. And now you can see, even in DC, we have a larger team. So that which suggests that Food for Peace is trying also to improve its own capacity so that some of the challenges that you are facing, we can minimize those. Like I know that we take a lot of time to review your document and many other areas. So we are also trying to strengthen our own capacity so we can be much more quicker and efficient in responding to your requests. So Food for Peace is part of Feed the Future, right? Food for Peace, any project that is working on food security in U.S. government, they are part of Feed the Future. So Food for Peace reports to Feed the Future. Not only we report, we also get funding from Feed the Future. So you can see, so first of all, before I go to that discussion, there are 32 annual monitoring indicators that Food for Peace has. It's its list, 32. And in that list of 32 indicators, these 18 indicators come from Feed the Future that we do not have any control over. And that list will change once the Global Food Security Act list of indicators will be finalized. That list will change. But right now, there are 18 indicators that annual monitoring indicators, right? Yeah, there are 18 annual monitoring indicators that come from Feed the Future that we do not have any control over. And I know some of the issues related to disaggregate, those disaggregates also mostly associated to Feed the Future indicators. And that's something that unfortunately we do not have much control over. It's similar to you. We as an M&E professional, we may have some concern with some of the indicator, particularly relevance or usefulness, but we are part of the overall strategy and we have to report on them. So and then we have about 12 indicators that come from Feed the Future that are incorporated in our baseline inline indicators, right? And again, that will change as the agency finalizes its global food security strategy and their list of indicators. So out of 32 indicators, annual monitoring indicators, 18 of them, which are more than half, are Feed the Future indicators. And then if we look at how many of them are required, for the annual monitoring indicators, you can see only one indicator is required. I will get back to Nestor's comment about the definition is so broad. But just for your information, only one indicator among the list of annual monitoring indicators which is required. For baseline indicators, there are more required indicators, but it doesn't matter in a way because the burden is not on you. There are other issues with baseline that I will get to. I will get into later on. So I think one of the bigger challenge that we all face is that, again, we took permission from the PBO to share a theory of change and help us understand where the hundreds of indicators come from. So if a project, we also ask when you design a project, when you design an M&E plan, we ask that for every single outcome that you include in your log frame, there should be at least one indicator. That's not Food for Peace monitor, but if you are a project manager, and if you are training farmers or mothers, you probably would like to know whether the practices are being picked up by the mothers or by the farmers, right? So that's why we suggested that if there is every single outcome that you include, there should be at least one indicator. So this kind of gives you a snapshot of the yellow dots are Food for Peace monitoring indicators, annual monitoring indicators, and then the blue dots are indicators that are custom, that are identified by the implementing partner. Yes, so
if anybody needs to get up and come over here so you can see the dots, get up, stretch, come on over. Right, because we coded this for a reef, right? Red dots are Food for Peace baseline endline, yellow dots are Food for Peace annual monitoring, and then green and blue are your own custom indicators. So get up, and the logic and the flow of the TOC is not what is important. What is important is the coding of the dots and how many red, how many blue,
and
how many yellow.
just for your information, like this is a real life example. This is the current project. And you can count out of these 34 annual monitoring indicators, how many annual monitoring indicators were applicable to this particular project, which has 3 very diverse sectors: income, on and off farm income generation, nutrition, and disaster risk reduction. So yeah, if you wanna have any comments.
I have a question for you based on the comment that you just made about we want to see whether training is resulting in change in practices. I think we're finding that we're being asked to report on the number of hours per participant of training. And that's really time-consuming.
No, I think there could be a communication problem. Yeah. What we are saying is that what we can call as a training, right? There is an indicator, number of people trained. Yeah. Can we call, if I am coming to you once and just have 1 hour conversation sat in a discussion session, should we call it as a training? So that's where there is a definition in the PIRA, what can be termed as a training, right? There has to be a defined curriculum. There has to be, if I am training the people participating in mother group or care group, we cannot count every time they come. It's a one training, but they're coming in different parts. So that could be a definition thing, but we do not require number of hours.
So a comment looking at that, and then also from my own personal experience. So the log frame is completed. I'm sitting there, maybe a week before the proposal is due, and we have lots of empty spaces in the outcome areas where we don't have, there are no food for peace required indicators or RIA indicators. There are lots of empty spaces that I need to fill with those custom indicators that are all blue there. Okay? And what that means is that on top of the annual monitoring indicators that are required, I am filling in lots of space. Okay? And those indicators are coming from, I don't know, sometimes from my head, at the time, because I'm looking at things like systems level indicators that, for instance, look over there, indicator number 84, Transformative Capacity Index, has not really come out as something, as an indicator as yet that has been accepted. So I have to make up something or elements of something that I have to put into those spaces when I'm looking at things like development of market systems, development of governance systems, responsiveness of governance systems, etc. So at the systems level, but then even at the level of looking at, outcomes that may involve things like quality of life improvement, etc., for women and so forth. And in my review of the Feed the Future indicators last week, at the time when it was due, in fact, one of the things that I felt, I was even thinking, gee, there needs to be more disaggregation, but one of the things that I saw, a couple of things that I saw was, first of all, that in terms of looking at, are women becoming empowered? I could not really gather that, except for the WEAI at baseline and endline. There was nothing during, the program life that I could look at for that, except for the disaggregation on something like gross margin. Okay?
So somewhere there, and otherwise it's just looking at the number of women participating or increase the number of women participating and so forth. That's fine, but I think, that point about looking at the story behind it is still kind of not there when it comes to the reporting. And that is the part, I think, which still needs some work, where we still need to be looking, and that also what we wind up doing in order to compensate for that in our log frame and theory of change is the addition of all of these custom indicators. So I think we can't just look at what Food for Peace is proposing or what Feed the Future is proposing, but at the same time we need to be looking at what are we actually doing in our programs, what are the actual outcomes that we're developing in our programs, and does the indicator list support them all? And for me, that's the big frustration, the big question, and where maybe we need to be looking.
Thank you, Mara. I think you are inviting for more indicators, and which I tend to agree. If you are the project manager or if you are the head of food security, in order to tell the story, if you have indicator in every level, you can tell a story that we trained this many farmers, and out of this many farmers adopted these practices, and out of these many farmers, how many of them are women, how many of them are men, and as a result of the adoption of these practices, their yield increased, and as a result of this yield increase, this has happened, it changed their life. So to tell this story, you need indicators. So that's one. And if I am a project manager, if you are delivering a service, you need to, the project manager, the chief of party needs to know whether that is, what is the quality of the service delivery, right? So you need to know whether farmers are adopting the practices. It is quite possible, and I have seen a number of projects which are doing great work in service delivery, but then because there was a problem in theory of change, the next level of outcome is not happening, right? So you need to know as a project manager whether the results are moving along the chain. So yes, I fully agree with you that there are many missing gaps. When you submit the proposal and you need indicator, and we do not have many indicators because we hesitate to come up with indicator to even some, in many cases we don't have, like what Jacob mentioned, we do not have very many system level indicators because this is an area that is new for not only for Food for Peace, but in general US government. So we do not have very many indicators that capture the system level changes. We are trying, and you will see probably some of them will eventually come because as we are trying to develop, there was an indicator consultation meeting for our strategic results framework. So eventually we will try to identify, and if you know any indicator, we wholeheartedly welcome for suggestions. I will get back to you, Megan.
Arif, Megan's been waiting a while, and then Sonia, and then we need to move on.
Okay.
I had two quick things. First, I wanted to say a thank you to Food for Peace in general for the flexibility that I've also been in the situation that Mara is referencing, where we have areas where there's no required indicator. Thanks for being open to programs that think of an integrated approach that may be outside of the indicator list and outside of the indicator, menu that's out there. But in those cases, a lot of times, and this gets to Lisa's point earlier, the next step is then to look at the previously called F indicators, standard indicators from State Department. And in fact, a lot of the missions in the countries that we are working have in their CDCS and their PMPs mission indicators that they expect the programs to implement. So what Lisa was referencing actually in my head kept going off F indicator, F indicator, F indicator. There is an F indicator on number of hours, and in many cases, we are being asked at times to incorporate those F indicators or report on those F indicators, even if they're not part of our IPTTs, because missions have them and have targets set on them, keep thinking of our programs, keeping our programs in mind.
Before I get to Sonia, I want to respond or clarify a couple of points. So yes, Megan, thank you, that in the past, there were many mission indicators. In 2013, when Food for Peace revised its indicator list, we reached out to mission, and so that we can integrate some of the mission indicators. In 2013, we had 4 projects, 4 countries, Madagascar, Malawi, Burundi, Nepal. Madagascar, I was in 2 of those workshops where we brought mission to tell us what are the indicators that you want to add, because they have, like you rightly pointed out, that they have CDCS. What I know, Madagascar didn't come up with any single indicator. I was in Malawi, they didn't come up with any single indicator. Nepal, because of the environmental fund that these 2 projects, there was a fund that went into this, they added 1 indicator, environmental indicator. So if you are seeing a barrage of indicators coming from the mission, please let us know, because we also try to, then we can manage that expectation between mission and us. There will always be some indicator that probably we have to accept because the mission would like to report on their CDCS. But if you see very many indicators are coming from mission, please involve us so we can participate in that discussion as well. Yeah, please.
Thank you. First, I just want to say that I've worked on a lot of other sectors before, not as much Feed the Future, but I really appreciate the effort that's been put on identifying indicators. I think the challenge is not necessarily the number of indicators. You're never going to be measuring outcomes with just indicators. That's just not feasible, and if you're trying to do that, you're going to miss the unintended outcomes. So I think it's worth at least us thinking and having a discussion about what other qualitative tools do we have room for. And if indicators that we have to track on an annual basis are preventing us from that, then maybe that's a conversation worth having, because I have yet to work on a program where the indicators tell the entire story. It's just not, it doesn't happen. And no matter how well developed your theory of changes, no matter how much you have thought about your indicators, there's going to be unintended outcomes. Some will be good, some will be bad. Now, how do we capture that? What are the tools we use to do that? And how do we also have a discussion about that rather than just being stuck on indicators, which I think we have all spent a lot of time. I mean, I've worked in the governance sector for the last 2 years, and it's been insanely difficult to try to get to those indicators that we can concretely measure that will tell eventually the story.
Okay, and we're going to wrap up this.
Sure.
I'm sorry, Ripple. Go ahead, respond, and then one question online, and then we need to move on.
Okay. So should I wait for the online question?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I really appreciate what you just said. We were saying, just getting back to the discussion about roads, right? If you build a road, we have just one indicator, how many kilometers of road. But the impact of roads could be huge. That can be lifeline for many communities. And probably you need to do a dedicated study to understand the impact of that road. It might, and through qualitative approach, through other approaches. So yeah, we do not want you to be only stuck into the indicator that is on the log frame. And that's one of the reasons we put in our policy and guidance that you can dedicate 5% of your resources just to monitoring, not even evaluation. So there is no cost for baseline inline because that's now taken over or implemented by Food for Peace. There is no cost for midterm evaluation because that's a separate line item that we suggested even how much to budget for. But just for monitoring, we say that you can budget up to 5%, and that's just to help Food for Peace in general. Whoever is reviewing the proposal, they have a common understanding, as well as you have a common understanding that you can budget. So which means if it's a $30 million project, you can budget $1.5 million just for monitoring. So you can plan for many of these activities or dedicated studies to do that.
Thank you.
From online, Rodwell Zabanda from CRS has a question, pretty specific one. Since Food for Peace is planning on contracting the baseline endline consultants, will the consultants accept adding PBO custom indicators, or will they only focus on Food for Peace indicators?
So that's a great question, and that's a long, we are kind of in the middle of that conversation. So first of all, the baseline is a contract, right? And as you know, when you go for a contract, unlike cooperative agreement, you have to exactly tell the contractor how they will be budgeting for, right? How many indicators, exactly which indicator, that, and how many sample size. So we have to tell them at the beginning, these are the indicators, and then you can add this many indicators that we don't know into your budget. So that's one challenge that we face when we contract out the baseline. And it's not for one project, it's not for one country, it's multiple countries. So that's the challenge there. The second big challenge is we are also not a big fan of many baseline indicators, right? The reason is it's also a burden. So for example, right now, we are doing two baseline, one in Ethiopia and one in DRC for the new award. And the pilot testing of the baseline instrument, it takes about 3.5 hours to administer the survey, right? So we all know who are in this business that that has an implication on the quality of the information that you get, right? And it's not only us. We cannot reduce the number of indicators unless we as an USG, because the majority of the time that goes into some of the indicators, that's not, food for peace specific indicators. So there is the resilience module, there is the poverty module. So there are indicators that takes a lot of time. And it has to be a broader discussion within the U.S. government and we are trying to engage into that discussion, but it's not only food for peace. So when you are already designing a survey for 3.5 hours, adding any indicator is going to, again, further compromise the quality of the data. But what we are suggesting, nobody is preventing you to collect the same information through your beneficiary, from your beneficiary, right? If you want to collect information from your beneficiaries, then yes, go ahead and do that. We are not suggesting that you cannot do it. So there is also some challenge in our end, and it's an evolution. And I know that we are also probably not all the time. We are consistent in our messaging because we work with a global team, and we finalized our monitoring evaluation policy recently. So before we finalized it, also people were providing comment, and you didn't have a reference document to say, hey, you are suggesting this, but that's not what your policy and guidance are telling us. So now we have a common document that both Food for Peace M&E advisor as well as your M&E advisor can reference to and argue on whether this can be done or this cannot be done, or whether we should be changing it or not changing it. With that,
Yeah, thank you so much, Arif. And again, if you have more questions, more concerns, please use the note cards. Write them down. It's a short day today. There's a lot to discuss. I think a big part of determining if there is too much of something is to think about whether or not we're using it. So we're moving into this next session now, data use. A lot of you asked in pre-consultation interviews, you were wondering specifically how is Food for Peace using some of the data. Food for Peace is also very curious about how you are using a lot of the data. So if we are going to keep this argument that there's too many indicators being collected, while also recognizing that there are a lot of indicators needed to manage programs well and to understand if change is occurring. There are a lot of other tools needed. Qualitative tools and different types of inquiry, but we need to think about how we're using the data. So I'm going to ask you to break into small groups, and we will spend the next 25, maybe I'm going to cut it to 20 because we're really running over in some areas, but let's spend 20 minutes, a nice mix of Food for Peace at a table as well as PVO staff. I want you to discuss the questions that are above your flip chart there. I had my screen up, but I've lost it now. But we want to understand how are IPs using the annual monitoring data to revisit the theory of change? How are you using it to revise your targets, to revise implementation? How are you using your baseline data to determine beneficiary targeting, to revise the TOC, and to revise project interventions. Now, since this consultation is about indicators, I really want you to think about the indicators before you and say, are there any indicators here that are really useful to us in making programmatic decisions? If so, highlight them. Let Food for Peace know which of these indicators, whether or not they are Food for Peace only or Feed the Future Food for Peace, which ones are really helping you make decisions. I also want you to outline which indicators are not very useful to you in decision making. Now, it may be that these same indicators are very useful to Food for Peace or very useful to higher levels of bureaucracy. So, you know, the point is to find out if all of the indicators are being used by somebody in some way. When you focus on the indicators that are not useful, I'd really like you to hone in on the Food for Peace only. Again, these are outside the scope of current negotiating power. So even if you find they're not useful, the people in the room today are not the people that are making decisions about the Feed the Future Food for Peace indicators. Okay, so is that clear? So when you have ideas about some of these are not useful, we are not using them to inform programming, stick with the indicators that there may be room for change. So you have the questions. Each group has the questions. We'll take 20 minutes. Online group, you'll have someone from Food for Peace joining you as well. And Adrian and Holly will lead you through your online discussion. So we'll push break forward a little bit. After this session, Food for Peace will explain to you how they're using a lot of the indicators, which was another specific request from you. So are the instructions clear? You okay? Please take notes. You've got markers. We will be reporting out. We want to capture this. So you have flip chart paper, you have markers, and I'll check in at about 10 after 10 o'clock.
to go through this. One of the questions said how the baseline has been used for data for setting the target. There were two comments. In some organizations said that the data had not been used because it was late, but has been used to modify other strategies. In the specific case of Madagascar, I say that the baseline team did a big effort, and they provided not the whole report, but the table with the values of each indicator on the baseline. So in that case, we use the baseline target values to tweak our targets because that arrived when we were doing the startup workshop. So in that case, it was useful, but not always timely. And then when we talk about how we are using annual monitoring to revisit the zero change and to revise the targets. You are using more to revise the targets and implementation and not much to revise the zero change. Well, and the discussion of the useful, which one of the indicators were more useful and not, we discussed, but we didn't, I think, reach to much agreement, but something that we say that the indicators for adopting practices and the nutrition adoption practices were some of the useful indicators. I think we didn't discuss much on which one were not useful.
It's a biased list right now.
Yeah, it is a biased list here because it's more difficult to say which one is more useful, which one is more useful because it could be useful according to the context or according to the sector we are working. I don't know if I mean something.
We do want to try to get a reading if you feel that any are not helping you make programmatic decisions. At least get it down on a note card. How many folks in the room are in agreement and online that the baseline data has been useful for targeting? We get a show of hands, a nod of heads, a neck wiggle, something. How many of you are using baseline data for your targeting?
Initial targeting or retargeting?
Either.
Well, it's not there.
Well, I would say repair for initial targeting.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe for year two, you know?
The first one I think is guessing, kind of, right?
Right.
So use the retargeting as your structure your answer.
Okay. Oh, just quick.
What we discussed was that if you're going to retarget in year two, or if you're doing a refine and implement program, which you haven't started implementing yet by then, you can possibly use it if your prep for year two is submitted later than the baseline data. If your prep for year two is submitted before the baseline data, there's not much you can do until year three.
Okay. Any comments from this group, Kate's group, on use of the data, either annual monitoring or baseline data for making programmatic decisions, informing POC?
One of the pieces of feedback that I got from some of our teams was that they basically don't get a response to their annual reports for quite a while from Food for Peace. So the ability to actually incorporate that into any sort of adjustments or learning can be quite difficult. I had one team say that it took 6 months to get feedback on one of their annual reports. And so, you know, by then they're already into data collection for the next cycle, right? And so the ability to actually use that in any sort of programming is kind of limited as a result.
Okay. Did you want to continue on what came out of your conversation?
Sure. I mean, we were talking about a lot of the kind of issues that would be driving the ability to kind of actually use monitoring or baseline data. One of them being the budget question of how we're budgeting, like ourselves as IPs, for quality staff. And, you know, basically, you know, at the bidding point, you know, focusing on competitiveness and not necessarily on what's best for a high quality kind of M&E team. Another kind of piece related to that then was the capacity of both, you know, our staff as well as the AORs and their ability to kind of process what we're doing for M&E, whether it be a plan or which plan was that? Like
or DQA.
Yeah,
yeah. On a DQA, timely feedback on a DQA, and repeating that. We had a team that waited a year to get feedback, and they were told that 5 of their indicators were rejected. The data for those indicators were rejected, but they didn't know during that 1-year period. But that also speaks to both the capacity of the implementer and I think our AOR, because ideally our team would have figured that out in advance, but they didn't. So again, thinking about staff capacity, I think, is huge.
Yeah. And then also the quality of our own databases and making sure that they're of a quality. And then, the high level of volume means that there's just less time to actually do real learning and to adopt like an actual learning agenda and do the different types of qualitative pieces that could actually uncover stories of why indicators are doing what they're doing.
I would just add one, I think, important piece that we discussed is just the triangulation of data, because we had a hard time thinking through which indicators are useful or not, because they do serve a purpose. If you can't tell what your activity has achieved, which a lot of output indicators do, then how do we know that you're really doing what you're doing? I mean, there is a quality check purpose to a lot of indicators as well, and recognizing that not all indicators are going to tell the program story. They're one step in that story. But then how do you use these outputs and triangulate them with other data sources that you have? And that often doesn't happen because the capacity is not there. That's a lot of sophistication that needs to happen. That's somebody who's able to analyze the monitoring data, take the qualitative data, put together a report that chief of party may be able to do, but a lot of our M&E managers are just not there, especially on large programs where they weren't adequately recruited. There's a lot of turnover we're seeing in this field because it is a very technical function. So a lot, especially in countries, our M&E managers tend to move from implementer to implementer. Whoever's paying highest, contractors typically pay higher, so NGOs are often left with not necessarily the highest quality staff. So I think that's definitely a challenge, is the quality of our team and the ability of our team to actually do this analysis and use this data, because they all have very well-developed learning agendas. There's every intention to do this and to think about the learning, to think about how to adapt their activities, but when it actually comes to doing it, it's a bit more challenging.
Thanks so much. And it looks like you noted a lot of useful indicators. Not really, I don't know if we ran out of time, but nothing jumped out as not being useful to you, or you didn't have time?
Most of the indicators that Mercy Forge team indicated as being less useful were the ones that were the BFS.
So feed the future. Okay. Same with CRS. Okay. Others in agreement with that statement? The ones that are least useful to you are the ones that we really don't have a lot of room to budge on. Okay, I'll turn it over to the online community.
So with regard to the first question, some of the answers that we got is that annual monitoring is used to revise geographic targeting in conflict situations. We also were told that the midterm theory of change is revisited, or when the midterm theory of change is revisited, it looks at the annual monitoring to inform any of those challenges, or any of those changes, excuse me. But then we did get a comment that the annual monitoring does not inform the TOC at all. We sort of got hung up on that, so we'll skip question number 2, although I'm sure some of those could be relevant as well. Why are you, well, and then I guess in response, I think this is important, in response to the question, why are you not using annual monitoring to revise your theory of change? Just to get an understanding of what the obstacles are there. The responses given were that in the past it wasn't required, and that there's a lack of guidance and capacity on how to do that, and that in some cases there are data quality concerns on lower level indicators, which are many of them are annual monitoring and would be informing that. And online community, if I have missed something, please chime in for any of these at any time. So we'll skip number 2, and we'll go right to number 3, which are the positive indicators and what's been beneficial. And we have a slew of them, which seem to match some of those previously identified. specifically, and I'll just read the numbers for ease, but numbers 9, 8, 15, 60, 16, 38, and 54. When the question posited was, and we just got a number 80 that slid in, and when we posed the question of least useful, it's interesting that number 8 also appeared. So it has appeared in both the good as well as the least useful, number 81 and number 36. And number 8 and number 36 are some of the more complicated indicators regarding gross margin and incremental sales. And I think the comment is well noted, which is these are the least useful because we are targeting mostly smallholders, so they have limited land and to produce. So I think that wraps up, unless we saw anything else come in. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And finally?
I think a lot of what we discussed has already been raised. We didn't talk really specifically about about which indicators were the most or least useful, though there was a comment that noted that the number of people trained wasn't necessarily impacting how we revise implementation or adjust the theory of change. So, the other issue I think that we identified was that there does not seem to be a very strong understanding amongst our field teams, amongst our M&E folks, on how to use data to validate or to adjust the theory of change. That this is kind of a new area, that the theory of change is kind of a new thing, and how to use what we're gathering to adjust it, I think is still something that people are not aware of. So while they're gathering data, they may not see the inherent usefulness of the data in terms of being able to validate and adjust the theory of change and make it more of a living thing than what it currently is, which is just kind of, something that we collect data against. So understanding that and seeing the value of that, I think, is something we identified as a gap.
Anything else?
That was about it.
Oh, okay. Great. Because we're running, thank you all so much, because we're running a bit behind, I'm going to ask you to take your break now. When you come back, Arif will share how Food for Peace is using some of the data. Because again, we have three sort of distinct parties. As long as somebody's using the data we're collecting, we're good. It might be IPs, it might be Food for Peace, it might be Feed the Future. But we want to collect data that somebody's using. So let's take a 10-minute break, grab some coffee, some pastries out there, fruit, and let's come back, we'll take like a 12-minute. Come back at 20 to 11, please.
Department of State and USAID jointly produced an annual performance report. And some of you probably are familiar with when you hear that the mission says, oh, we need to report to PPR. So that's what PPR is for. So PPR data goes into this report, which is jointly produced by Department of State and USAID. And again, we understand, as we were saying, the challenges of the timing. PPR data is due, mission uploads the data that you submit, particularly for development projects, and they submit it in November when you are submitting the SFPQ. So even last year, when we gave 1 week between annual quarter, the narrative report and SFPQ, we were booed by the mission because they needed the data to submit to PPR. And the PPR report is signed by the ambassador, so they really make all their effort to make sure that their portfolio are well represented. For the first time, FFP has been planning or working on an annual report. So the annual report will be, hopefully, it will be done by next month. So the report is drafted. And again, this is all utilizing the data that you report to us. Then every year, we produce what we call ARR highlight. So it's all the annual results report that you submit. So it's the data that is pulled, the information pulled from the ARR, annual results report, primarily from narrative report to produce this. So this goes to various different document reporting, as well as we share that with the CBOs, meaning the country backstop officer that we have. Refine and implement, right? So based on the 2012 evaluation report, we had 5 evaluations in 2012, and we looked at the data, and although the evaluators reported that all these 5 projects reduced stunting, when we paid closer attention, we found only 1 reported reduction in stunting. So we then discussed, we had an internal discussion that how do we address that, what are some of the challenges? And that's where we as an office, we discussed that, okay, let's give implementers 1 year time so that they can better design or refine their project design. So again, that's another example of how we use the data that you produce or report. Every year, West Africa region, they produce a report which is mostly using ESSP information, how many projects are reporting on different indicators and whether we can aggregate them, and many other aspects of ESSPs. It's only West Africa region that we produce every year. We use the annual monitoring data in midterm evaluation, whether the evaluation is done by a contractor hired by your project or we do it, we use the data. And again, this is one example how you can use annual monitoring data. So I took gross margin information, which is one of the indicators that people often don't like, but it has wealth of information. And this analysis shows that a farmer with an average land size is making $88 in a season from one crop, right? So that raises a question, can you believe that that will help the farmer to achieve food security, right? And that may help the project to revisit its theory of change and think about, or should we do something else, or where is the gap, right? So that's another example how you can use the data that we collect or you collect through annual monitoring. The CBOs and the mission use annual monitoring data to measure activity performance. So they look at the data and they come back to you, or when they go out to the field visit or they have a discussion. Again, that can vary by country, by project, by mission, depending on who and the person's workload, depending on the person's interest about data. Like we are all on the same page as you are. Not everybody is very much data-minded, but that's another way people use the information. Again, that's another example where we look at our annual monitoring data and then we try to analyze So, and then we talk to the CBO. Eventually, we are thinking that probably we will also reach out to the partner because we just started. And again, we also face similar challenges your M&E team faced, that even though you saw a large team, we are also very much bogged down to do day-to-day work. So to address that, we have these two wonderful interns who are helping us with this analysis. So that's another strategy that you can think about, bringing interns to analyze the data if your M&E team cannot do it, given their workload or capacity could be. So again, that's another example. That raises some of the very interesting questions, right? So this raises, if you look at the data, it raises very interesting question that whoever is receiving most support, they're not making most money. So, then why we are providing them most support while who is making more money? What is the reason? That can be very helpful for a project manager to think about. Any questions? So that's, in a snapshot, how Food for Peace use data. I know that there could be many other ways that people use that I am not aware of, but these are a snapshot of different ways Food for Peace use your M&E data that you support or you provide to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. So one question. You gave a really great example of using the 2012 evaluation reports and actually changing the way that we're working now for Find and Implement. Do you have other examples of where you've actually used data to make any sort of changes to the way that you guys are doing your business?
Yes. So the TOPS was born, again, because of another evaluation. FAFSA 2, not FAFSA 2, the ICB meta-evaluation, before TOPS, there was this institutional capacity building grant that was awarded to every single implementer who implemented a Title II project. And then there was this evaluation, the meta, every ICB had its own evaluation, but there was a meta evaluation, and that's, I'm not going to discuss about all the findings, but this TOPS was born as a result of that evaluation. There are many other examples that I can share. I know that. Another one was the FAFSA 2, the external. Food for Peace started doing external baseline. That was also a recommendation from FAFSA 2 study. So there are number of other examples that we can discuss. But I know that Lori gave me very hard 7 minutes, and I should not be go over 7 minutes.
No, it was because this is the time for Q&A.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have time for questions. And so anything specific, this is a topic, if you guys expressed great interest, how is Food for Peace using the data? If you have specific questions about specific indicators, this is your time to find out.
So I guess I have a concern, and it might affect how Food for Peace is using the data. So I've always assumed that Food for Peace is taking FFP-MIS data aggregated from all of us and then reporting it to Congress in your annual report. I have a pretty big concern on this cumulative, non-cumulative thing that I know that my colleagues and I have discussed previously with you, but I understand that some implementers have gotten to choose kind of willy-nilly whether they want to put in their IPTT cumulative targets or non-cumulative targets. And so when you're talking about the achievements of Food for Peace for the year on some of these indicators, I have a pretty big concern that we're either under-reporting or over-reporting depending on how it's being framed, and I would never want to be Matt Nims trying to defend that number if an auditor were to come, because I feel like that guidance is lacking. Can you talk a little bit about the context in which that report is used and how you present figures from FFP-MIS on the Hill?
So yes, the cumulative and non-cumulative, we didn't have a guidance before, but now we have a guidance which will be shared with you very soon, or probably in some countries we already shared, that we added into indicator handbook. So the indicator handbook that we already have we added that this indicator is cumulative, this indicator is non-cumulative. So to address that concern. We, as I say, we look at when we, as every year, when you submit or project submits SAPQ, you know that for past 4 years, we get back to you and we ask you a lot of questions, because as soon as we know that this indicator is cumulatively reported, right, because in the IPTT, it is identified that whether the indicator is cumulative or non-cumulative, then we get back to you and we report only annual achievement when we submit, when we upload the data to Fit the Future MIS system. And that's one of the reasons we, for Food for Peace project, we tell our mission, don't report to Fit the Future MIS system by yourself. We report it because when we report it, we have this back and forth with you so that to make sure that what we are reporting is the true reflection of what we know based on what you submit. There are times when mission went ahead and submitted, and in that case, we override what they report on.
Other questions?
Any questions from the online community?
So I have just a similar question that was being asked to us, which is, which of this long list of indicators do you find most useful as Food for Peace in terms of making your own programmatic changes? Is it all of them? Do you have a priority set that you really refer to or that you hear most frequently from the Hill that they're most interested in? The reason I'm asking is in part of the motivation for our M&E teams on the ground is to say, yeah, this indicator may not mean as much to you, but let me explain to you how it's actually used and how it's effective and how it's changing how we as a country are doing our programming. So it would be helpful to know which of these lists of indicators are most useful to you.
So that's a good question. You know, like I think which of these indicators are useful to us, that depends on how we are using it, right? So when we are doing, as the example that I showed, right, like this one, this is useful when I am talking to a project and helping project to better understand how the indicator can be used. But this indicator we will not include into IFAR, which goes to Congress, because they don't really, that's not valuable to them. So from that point of view, we use all information that you submit to us. All the Fit the Future indicators get reported with the Fit the Future annual report, all of them. And then you will be surprised. So in some of the reports, particularly the IFAR, they are more interested about numbers. They're not so much interested about the behavior. Yeah. They want to know how many people were reached using taxpayer dollars, right? How many children we reached, how many people were reached. So there are different interest groups who have different interests, but we try to use. I am not saying that we are there where we should be. You know, we also don't utilize the data that we believe that, you know, like we can do way better, and we are also victim of same problem that you have or your M&E team has, that we have plenty of information, but we don't have the capacity to do that. And we are trying, that's one of the reasons we are trying to increase our team size so that we can devote ourselves, some of the people, to analyze data and make it palatable to the project managers, right? So the CBO, the technical team, they can look at the data and we can analyze it in a way. We also try to partner with different universities, and because again, you know, that's another way that all the universities, they love data, right? And the baseline data or even annual monitoring data, if you said a partnership, and this data is now public. So you can give it to a grad student or a class, and they can analyze data. Recently, we did it in Guatemala. For Guatemala, we gave the data set, baseline data set to University of Arizona Economics Department. They analyzed and they shared that with us. So that could be another way to think about utilizing data utilization.
Actually, to follow up, and you kind of answered that. It was more in terms of, because I think one of the challenges we also have is getting our programs team to understand the data and use the data to adjust activities, not only for this program, but also as we're thinking of a follow-on or so on. But just what is your interaction with more of the program team and those who design the programs? For example, are you using, let's pick an indicator, percentage of men and women in union and earning cash who make decisions alone about the use of other activities that contribute to increasing this indicators that you're seeing across your portfolio of programs? Are you doing that sort of analysis, or is that something you wish to do in the future?
we are doing some, but not all. So just to get back to that particular example you gave, that's still a pilot indicator. So we used, when Feed the Future came up with this Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, and we implemented, in first year, we implemented in selected countries. So like in Guatemala, the first round of programming, where we did the baseline, we used it, right? And then we figured out or found out that that indicator is not particularly very much useful for food for peace development projects, which are not, very much value chain. We target very different kind of group of people. So then we worked with FANTA, and FANTA developed these age indicators related to gender, and then we have been piloting it. So we collected data from 2 rounds of baseline, and then now FANTA is analyzing this information to find out whether this information, whether those indicators are really telling us what we like to know. So, and then we should be able to then adjust or work, use it as it is, or completely, take them out and think about something else. So we are trying, right now, we are trying to analyze, for example, gross margin data that were submitted by every single project, that Food for Peace implements, to see what the data tells us. Again, it's a learning and evolution in our side as well. But yes, we are very much like to do that.
Okay, one more question.
Online.
And it's from TD from Juris. He wants to know how the FFP technical sector team uses the data that's collected. Non-M&E.
Okay. So that's a good question. Yes, FFP technical team also, again, like when you say FFP technical team, in 2013, when I joined, I was the 3rd member of the FFP technical team. And now we have probably 20 people in the technical team. So it's growing because everybody is realizing that, we need to strengthen our capacity so we can support our partners better. So they also review. So for example, the ARR summary, which is the annual results report that you share with us, we share with everybody, not only CBOs, but also with the technical team. And I did not have an interaction about how exactly they use it, but we have several interactions, particularly I can tell you about WASH, because that's one of the areas where we are trying to move the needle. And, and that's an extreme interest because that was not part of Food for Peace's main focus for a long time. There was a focus for a time, and then we kind of, there was a time when we didn't focus that this much. And then after this whole discussion about environmental enteropathy, again, Food for Peace started to focus on WASH. And we didn't have any WASH advisor. Now we have 2 WASH advisors. So we are also strengthening our capacity as well as they are also looking at this data. Sorry.
One short part, because I know we do want to get to the third-party discussion, and we can also keep writing questions down on cards. So if it's a short question, Diana, I don't mean to be, I don't like being the person to truncate things, I tell you. But,
okay, go ahead.
So one more question.
Make it quick.
Okay. This may be a tough question because it's kind of aspirational and future thinking, but I know Food for Peace started seriously investing in baseline final evaluations 5 years ago, and now we're coming into the fore where we're doing our first round of end lines. With that means that we formalize sufficient sample size, tests of differences. So I'm wondering, and we have a wealth of data, huge household surveys with a lot of questions and a wealth of information. So 2 parts, and maybe it's not something we can answer fully here, but something to think about. You mentioned that reporting to Congress tends to be coverage reach type indicators, and I'm wondering if Food for Peace has given thought that we can do so much better about demonstrating to Congress impact now that we have final evaluations that can demonstrate change on high-level impacts like stunting and other indicators. Is there any advocacy for doing that? And the second part to that is more internally.
you sort of spoke to this, would there ever be the thought of some kind of more formalized system of now taking, we've got 14 baseline endlines, a metadata type analysis for the whole, you know, the fact that we have this wealth of data, like trying to analyze all this data in a meta-analysis framework. So I know it's a lot. It's aspirational and you can't.
Yeah, so for the Congress, we haven't, you know, because the IFA report that directly goes to Congress, that is primarily driven by USDA, but that's a good suggestion. We haven't thought about it, but definitely we will think about it. For metadata analysis, yes, we already started thinking about, you know, analyzing the data that we already collected. I think it will be more meaningful when a series of inline data are already also be available, so we know what is the level of change that we are making. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Aretha. Thanks all of you for all your questions. I think this emphasizes we need more of these, right? We need to meet more often and talk about this. We'll break into some groups now. We are focusing on solutions. So you don't need to stay at the tables you're at. I've tried to synthesize the challenges here, and the idea is that each table will take some time to explore solutions together. I need your input to see if I've captured a lot of things were mentioned today. I think I've captured them into some nice, tidy groups that we can distribute. One, I'm going to put on hold. There was a lot of comment and concern about limited ownership of baseline, endline surveys and studies, and that we need more room to incorporate our own indicators in the baseline, endline. I feel that's more appropriate for the third session, which is all about your involvement in third-party studies. So that topic I've pulled out of the mix to discuss later. I've come up with just the sheer, the time piece, the sheer volume of data limiting the ability to use it, whether it is the volume of data that we are analyzing or collecting. A little bit confused about the limited time devoted to programming, because your programming staff are typically not the ones collecting the data or analyzing it, but we can bring that into the mix. But so this discussion would be of sharing some tips, coming up with some solutions of how to, you know, discuss, is this capacity, is it, are there, I don't know, out-of-the-box ideas about reducing the volume of data that we're collecting. Again, focusing only on the data where Food for Peace has negotiating power. So this is a tricky one, the time piece. I heard it come up again and again and again. It's a problem for Food for Peace. The other were another issue was the RIA criteria, that results in all of the indicators being included. Difficulty in prioritizing. We want to use if it's applicable, but it just seems everything's applicable. And the TOC Reese brought here, the sample, we see that 22 of the 32. So they didn't include 10 indicators, but they did include 22. So that seems to be one topic that's contributing to the volume of data. We have a culture of learning piece. That relates to the motivation and what's preventing the point Megan raised. Our staff don't see the validity in collecting this data, and Mara came back and said, well, why not? It would be really interesting. So what is preventing this culture of learning where our staff aren't curious about it or aren't motivated, or are you using the data for your own purposes? We had a comment from Hillary, right? Are they using it beyond Food for Peace reporting? Is that data you're collecting? Is it important to you in other ways? The high level of volume, is mentioned here, precluding our use of a learning agenda. We might have it, but we don't use the learning agenda, or we don't have the capacity. So I've lumped that into a culture of learning because that seems to be what's missing here. Is there agreement or dissent on that? Okay. We have the theory of change paradox, right, where the required and required if applicable indicators, they're not enough for us to understand change. They're not enough for us to really manage a program and note systemic change or note many other kinds of changes. But the more indicators we put in there, the greater the burden of monitoring. There was a comment online that we need more focus on theory of change development so that we can limit the indicators. We also, I think, need to better understand how to prioritize what pieces of the theory of change transfer to the log frame. And not every piece needs to transfer, right? And what do you want to monitor in that theory of change? And then the budget, I was going to throw out the budget one because I think Arif made a great point that you are given you are requested to spend 5%. You take a small project of $50 million, that's $2.5 million to collect data and analyze it and monitor, not to do baselines. And it's a lot of money. But I'm going to throw it back in for you can determine whether we need a table here, because I think this is really about management capacity and prioritizing that budget for M&E. And how do we convince our teams to actually spend the 5% on M&E and hire good staff? So are there broader, is there a bucket of issues that I missed? Or do you think that that represents most of what came up this morning? Anything missing? Again, the very valid comments on the limited ownership of baseline inline will take place in the third session. It's a lot to discuss. Yes, Megan.
I think it's part of the culture of learning with the ownership piece. I really think that field staff, I mean, we're all sitting here. I know that there are field staff on the line, but field staff have to feel ownership. And with so many people involved in these, field staff need to be empowered, and that needs to be discussed at the table about how you do that.
Absolutely. I think it goes under culture of learning. It's the motivation. It's absolutely, right, the ownership of achievement. Jacob.
The only one other thing that I was going to add, or that you had asked around staff capacity, is it's as much about, from the staff capacity, it's as much about the absorptive capacity as maybe the technical capacity. And I say that in that when you have lots of data, because you have so many indicators, and depending on what systems you're using to sort of streamline the intake or the inflow of that data, a lot of our M&E staff who are hired to be analysts just end up being data inputters. And so it's not that they don't necessarily have the capacity to do the technical analysis side, it's that they've by default been overburdened into just being data managers.
They have the physical or temporal capacity.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So let's put that up into this fuzzy big time bucket up here. Volume, I guess, the volume of data. So we do need to break into 4 tables. If the online community has a specific topic they'd like to choose, go ahead. You can guide them through that, Adrian and Holly. Maybe there's something you don't feel is worth a table topic, but let's just start here. Who would like to spend the next 20, 25 minutes seeking solutions to this RIA criteria that results in all of the indicators being included and not knowing how to prioritize? Who in the room would like to spend, their time on that? We've got Jacob as a taker. Anybody else? Okay, we'll just note that for now. And again, this is solution seeking. Sometimes we need to revisit challenges. Okay, Megan, Nestor, Jacob? Okay, again, solution seeking. How could we remedy this problem? We will need someone from Food for Peace to join each group. The culture of learning, the motivation, right? What is preventing us from the why? The point making, why is this happening? What's the story? What's the story behind that road? We've got, okay, and from Food for Peace, Arif, I know, wanted to be a part. Okay. So we definitely have at least a few people here. How about the theory of change paradox, right? The R's and RIAs are not enough to capture the theory of change, but if we load up everything, then it's a burden. Mara and Lori will join that conversation. Okay, anybody else? Well, we may just put that off and talk about it another time. Let's see, how about management capacity and budget? Like, again, we're back to, we've got Binta? Okay. Well, not everybody volunteered for everything, so we will need to choose one topic. It seems that I missed the great big one, didn't I? Okay, that was tricky. So the volume of data, limiting our ability to use the data. Okay, limiting time for programming, just limiting us all over the place. How many folks want to discuss that? Megan? Really? The vote? Okay.
I changed groups. I didn't realize that was going to be an option. She started with RIA.
I apologize for that. I was looking at my stars. Okay, well, let's not waste too much more time choosing. We're going to take volume of data and how it's the volume of data we need to analyze and collect, limiting our ability to use it. You can pull the tables apart if you need to. They are meeting at this side of this table. Those of you discussing RIA criteria and how to prioritize so that we don't include all 32, you're sitting here. Pull the tables apart if you need to. Culture of learning will be in the middle. I'm sorry, you're already sitting over here. So culture of learning at this table. Budget and management capacity, prioritizing dollars for M&E. That wasn't is anyone willing to speak with Binta? Ian, on that, again, solution-oriented. Okay, Mara, you and I can discuss TOC. Anybody that wants to join the TOC talk and be at this end of the table? And online community, did you have a preference? It would be great if you could go there because no one is doing that. And Binta could, if you're interested, the online community is talking about budget. Or you and not caring out. Okay. Okay, we're going to come together, and we won't have time to hear all of your solutions. I do hope the discussions were productive. They seem to be, because they're ongoing. Which table? Can I take it to maybe Jacob Gray's table? And Chum's table. We want to hear, we don't have time to hear all of your solutions, but we had some ideas about how to improve processes, how to overcome some of the challenges that we noted. So if each table could succinctly sum up one or two of the suggestions they have, we'll go around the room and also, how about online? You guys ready? You want to sum up one?
We can, yeah, we can start with theory of change.
Okay, and then we'll come to Jacob's table and move around clockwise.
So I think we got about 2 comments that are easily summed, and one of them is to include in the prep guidance the reminder that you should be reviewing annual monitoring data to revise your theory of change and therefore update the prep. And I don't know if Chung is here and is aware if we include that guidance already or not. I know that we specified in the annual results report. We can go back and check to see if we put it in the prep and put that reminder in there as well, if that would help. And then the second comment is a little tricky. The suggestion was to remove some of the required and required if applicable indicators, specifically numbers 8 and 16. And then we reminded the commenter that these are the future required and required if applicable indicators, so they can't be removed. So upon further reflection, the thought was like, okay, well, when you're trying to determine which indicators to prioritize for monitoring, you should use those that have the largest impact or affect the most people. Ipso facto, you don't have to monitor number 8 and number 16 because it affects a very low percentage of people that you're targeting in many cases. I don't know if we all want to support that, but it is an approach.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, everybody online. Who's speaking for this vote? Jacob, okay.
Okay. So actually there was a little bit of overlap between the two that you were just speaking of. So we had the challenge of the required if applicable criteria. And the one thing that came out in our conversation was that in some cases when we're looking at the annual monitoring indicators, the applicability criteria is much broader than the indicator itself. And so I guess the example I provided was it was applicable for all our projects working with value chain activities. And the indicator was incremental or farmers' gross margin. Well, there's a lot of value chain activities that have absolutely nothing to do with increasing farmers' gross margin. And so if you were a value chain strengthening activity and you were doing work with buyers and aggregators and not doing work with farmers' productivity, you would say, well, do we collect this data or do we not collect this data? We're not actually affecting that change, but we are a value chain activity. So one of the suggestions was to review those and make sure that the specificity in the applicability matches the indicator, because I think sometimes it's a bit broad and you end up putting a lot into that. So that was one example. The other one that I think we were debating and we hadn't quite gotten to, but there's a little bit of a lack of clarity from our part on, in a theory of change, do you take all of the outcomes that you have RIA and put them into your log frame and monitor them, including those outcomes which you may not directly affect. So if, for example, it's a government or another project which is doing the wash work is relevant to some of the work you're doing on household health, but you're not actually doing the wash work, do you then monitor also that indicator? Or do you establish a relationship with that other project, and does that indicator then find its way into your log frame? And so I think there was we had a question about that. We were of the understanding that, yeah, it says in the guidance that you should put all outcomes that are relevant to your project into your log frame. we were looking at the guidance, and it's not clear to us in the guidance. So one suggestion was to look at the guidance and be more specific and more clear about which outcomes from a theory of change absolutely need to be in your log frame versus which ones you can say, well, no, that one's not specific to us monitoring.
I'm going to let Arif respond quickly, and then we'll go to Kate's table here.
So the question is whether all of these outcomes that are articulated in the theory of change should go to a log frame. No, but particularly those outcomes which are delivered by someone else. It's not within your immediate scope. Our guidance suggests that should go into your assumption, because you are assuming if somebody is producing or ensuring access to latrine is important, doing that, then that is, you are assuming that access to latrine work will continue. Should you be monitoring it? If your next level of outcome depends on that assumption, if you are a chief of party, if I am a chief of party, definitely I would like to monitor that. If you are considering that the monitoring is only for donor reporting, then probably you don't want to. But if you are trying to monitor your project's performance, then if I am the chief of party, I will definitely like to know, because the next level of outcome depends on whether I am providing behavior change and somebody else is providing access. Then we are hoping that the improvement of behavior, but then if the people don't have access to that scene, then the behavior is not going to work out. So if I'm the chief of party, I will definitely like to monitor, but that's not, that's, I think, we all have to answer that whether we like to monitor it or not.
But it is not chief of party that ends up with every single RIA into the TOC and then an M&E team that's overburdened. I mean, that's how do you prioritize? That was the question.
And this group had some suggestions, so we may get to that. I do want clarification. They had a suggestion that if we're looking at the RIAs and you look at it with more specificity and decide, oh, we're doing value chains, but we're not doing that, can IPs decide upon themselves that they will not include it? Is that okay with Food for Peace? Did you hear Jacob's example?
The RIA is decided by the implementing partner.
Okay, so
when there is a negotiation with the Food for Peace team, I think the question is probably how we are defining value chain, right? Because the way we are defining that only we consider a value chain if the crop or livestock is grown for the primary purpose is marketing, right? If I am growing crop and then of course everybody, even in Bangladesh, a poor farmer sells a part of the production, but that's not value chain. The value chain is primary objective is to market. And if we are doing a value chain, if the project, sometimes many of the projects think that they are doing value chain, which probably they don't, because again, the primary objective is to market. And in Food for Peace development project, we target the very vulnerable poor group. So many of them are probably not participating in the value chain. So I think that's I think if we are doing value chain, then then that fit the future indicator. Then you are, again, if you are doing value chain, then you are within the fit the future realm, of course, and then your gross margin is a value chain indicator. You have no way to not tracking that. So again, that's the question.
So I'll add to the suggestion list that we do need some more clarity on when and how IPs can decide whether or not to include an RIA, that it's not a hard, fast rule. It says if you do value chains, this may not be a hard, fast rule. So that'll be the suggestion to Food for Peace to consider. One of many.
Oh, you have the list.
Okay. All right. Forgive me. I'm just going to read off some things that were suggested.
Just choose one or two of your favorites. Okay, suggestions.
Okay. So we had the first topic about the volume of data. One of the first suggestions was perhaps Food for Peace could consider placing or letting partners prioritize targets that they would still monitor required indicators, but only have targets for certain indicators. Limit the amount of disaggregation. There were also questions about how this data is actually being used. What does Congress actually want? Do these indicators give Congress and Food for Peace what they need to report on? Or are our partners just reporting things that aren't usually helpful? And then sort of similar problems that have been echoed before, requesting streamlining the ARR, SAPQ, and IPTT and prep review process would relieve some of the burden.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. I'll pass it on to Chuck and Hillary and Binta.
We had the budgeting question, and I think there were just a couple of points that we talked about. One was, and this is just my own personal observation, I had heard the 5% benchmark used before, but I didn't necessarily know that that should not include the midterm evaluation. So that's just more money that could possibly be freed up to. So I don't know if that was clear in whatever guidance has been given, but maybe that can be socialized a little bit more. And then even on the 5%, I don't think I've seen any guidelines on suggested uses of that. So in other words, what would be an ideal number of staff? And obviously, salary ranges vary between organizations, and there can be a lot of nuances to that, but at least maybe thinking through some sort of a guideline on out of that, this should be for staffing and these type of staff. Out of that, this should be for your MIS or monitoring and evaluation system. Out of that, this should be used for field visits to collect data, et cetera. So those are
a sample, maybe a sample of budget distribution for that 5%.
Sure.
Okay, that's a very creative suggestion.
Environmental guidance, budgeting for environmental safeguards, guidance that exists, something comparable.
Can you pass it on to Alyssa and Mara?
So we had the Tnc Paradox question also, and just a couple of points I think Lori kept reiterating over and over again, that all outcomes in the POC do not need to go into the log frame, and everything that's in the log frame does not need to go into the IPTT. I'm still a little bit wondering how that works, but one of the things we focused on was the blue indicators, or the custom indicators, of which there are many. And one of the things we talked about was, are there different ways of measuring those outcomes other than, say, by adding quantitative indicators? Are there qualitative ways that we can do that? So, for instance, now many of us have conduct initial gender analyses, youth needs, labor market analysis, social behavior change, barrier analysis, et cetera. But they're conducted at the beginning of the project. They're not conducted throughout the project. There's no ongoing learning taking place on those qualitative issues. So we're not actually, going back on a periodic basis and checking where are we with these findings, these initial findings, and how are we using them within the project. So that was one way we thought about to address that issue. We were just kind of wondering whether, and we were wondering whether this would be of value to Food for Peace, as they're not Food for Peace required indicators, but they're indicators that we, would be useful to us and would not just be reporting data. So that was anything else that I missed that you want to emphasize here?
One thing, the tiers, thinking about when you have so many outcomes. We do want a robust theory of change. We want a lot of detail. But when we think about what transfers into the theory of change, think about it in tiers of project. What did I say?
Into the theory of change.
Theory of change, transfer into the log frame. Think about it in tiers, right? You definitely want to make sure the changes you expect to see in years 1 and 2 are covered. You've got some indicators that when you're doing your annual review, you can see that changes taken place. You want some changes you expect to get going in year 3 and 4. So you want to make sure that all those tiers are covered. I mean, that's a very simple way of describing it, but a theory of change is in layers, and we can expect, I mean, it is chronological. We expect these changes to occur first, and then in the middle, that's not going to be happening in year 1, right? So we plan and we structure our M&E around the expected change. It'll help your ARR narrative as well. You know, we won't be reporting on this piece of the TOC in year 1 of the first year ARR. Let's take the last group, and then we do want to spend the rest of the afternoon on the third-party involvement. Who's speaking? Sonia?
Thank you. I'll be quick. We focused on the learning and how do you promote a culture of learning, and we all concluded that it is the primary issue is M&E capacity, and not necessarily just the capacity to do the analysis, but the time as well. A lot of times the M&E staff is bogged down just doing data collection, and rather than actually doing the analysis and doing the feedback loops. And Arif actually had a good suggestion, which we debated a bit, which is why don't we contract out the data collection for the quantitative piece, and then we can do internally more of the qualitative exercises and have the M&E team focus more on the analysis and feeding back the learning. But I think the most critical and applicable component, which I think works on projects where I've seen it done properly, is where you actually plan all of these activities and you budget for them. And they're not just in your M&E plan, but they're in your work plan. So I think back to your point, you have to be very specific. Every quarter we are going to meet and we're going to review this. And this is the budget for it. Every year we're going to meet and we're going to do this. Now, in addition to that, what really helps, yes, you have all these quantitative indicators. What do you do with them? Well, what questions do you want to answer with them? How do they tie to your outcomes? Can we establish some of those questions as part of your learning agenda at the start of the program? Maybe they need to be adjusted. But making sure you're thinking about what you as a program want to learn rather than just, reporting. And I think it's moving beyond just the mentality that we have to report on these, but think about what is it that we want to learn. And if these indicators are really not helping you learn, then, and if you have evidence that they're not helping you learn because you've collected the data and you've tried to use it, then I think we have a much stronger argument as implementers to come back and say, we've tried this and here's all these other qualitative tools that we've used that did a much better job helping us learn, and therefore we really recommend that you drop those indicators. However, as an implementer who's been trying to do this for a while, I think we're struggling with that because we're not very systematic about how we implement things. So it's hard to come back to our donor and say, this is working much better because we don't really have an alternative right now. So just a little bit of outside of the box, I think, thinking for us as well in terms of how do we address this.
Thank you, Sonia. And then we'll wrap this up with one more comment from the online community.
Yeah, we also looked at budget, so it's a good segue. The concerns that you raised, and they were echoed also online. Some of the positives that they felt were that the recent RFA, and this has been done in the past as well, but that requires that the M&E manager be a key staff. But I believe in the most recent RFA, we included some qualifications of what that individual should look like. So that was deemed very helpful. Under budgeting for M&E is a concern. Similar to what Buck was saying, the 5% threshold or recommendation, not all of them were aware of it, and some of them who were aware of it didn't think that that was being actually followed. And that they think that one of the ways to better ensure that there's training, capacity building, enough staff to get to the field for some of these surveys is to make sure that the M&E team, field headquarters are involved in the design process of this budget.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to swiftly move into the next session.
Lauren, before, just can I ask a question? Sorry.
Did you write it on a card?
Okay.
I'm sorry, Nestor, but we were supposed to end at 12:15. We have a little bit of buffer room. We can stay till 12:30, but this topic was very important before the consultation. It came up again this morning. The awardee participation in the third-party process, okay, and that effect on subsequent monitoring efforts. Lisa made a point there that many of you, Nestor, some of you, talked about needing more room to incorporate our indicators into the baseline end line. There's limited ownership of the baseline and end line and ability to get a grasp on what needs to be measured. So this is a chance for Food for Peace to hear about your concerns and your experiences. We are going to multitask here. As we talk about challenges, we are going to propose solutions. So ways to improve this process so that you feel more involved and that the needs of both parties are met, IPs and Food for Peace. Food for Peace, again, we encourage you to ask clarifying questions. Lisa, did you want to start things off? Okay, go right ahead.
Ari said in our conversation, we were talking about this difficulty of ownership and uptake, and Ari said that for Mali and Bangladesh, there was not just a present back, but actually a workshop on the baseline data, and that seemed to have a significant impact. So I would love to see information about that design. He said he would share some from Bangladesh. I think that would be really helpful.
Sounds like maybe a suggestion to replicate that, make that a part of every project.
Lori, would it be helpful if I gave sort of an overview of partner engagement? Sure. My question to her was, I manage the baseline contracts for Food for Peace, and if it would be helpful to, some of you have experience working with these baseline contracts over the past couple years. Some of you, it may be new to you. Would it be helpful if I gave some examples of ways that Food for Peace engages with the partners to sort of start this conversation, if there are areas where that sort of trigger a thought of like, well, why aren't we involved in this? Or like, oh, I didn't realize we were involved in this. Would that be helpful, or is it better just to keep sort of the comments going?
It's better to you if you give that.
Okay. So I want to echo what Ari said at the start of the meeting, is that the baseline process has been an evolution over the past couple of years. We started in 2012. Now we're 5 years later. We're still going. It has evolved into a much larger effort. So the contract I manage is called Evelyn, and we're doing evaluations. We're doing baseline studies. We're doing some other kinds of studies. So it's developing. And with that, so has the level of engagement with partners, with mission in the design process and in consultations. Diana Stukol is here. She's been involved from the get-go. I just joined 2 years ago. So Diana, please feel free to contribute as you see fit. But some of the key ways that we involve partners throughout these processes with the externally led baseline studies is we start with the baseline workshop. That's going to be about 3 days, sometimes 4, depending on the number of projects in country, where the contractor, in this case Evelyn, presents gives an overview of the process over the months to come, discusses the actual instruments that we're updating at the time of the baseline workshop. We have a standard questionnaire that we've been using and refining over the past couple of years, but we meet and we break out with the partners. I don't know if I'm looking around the room and I don't think I remember any. Mary, you've been to one of the workshops? Okay.
I haven't, but I know.
You know about them. So we break out with the partners to contextualize the survey for some of those questions that ask a laundry list of what foods do you eat. The partners are informing those foods. For the same thing for practices. What are the agricultural practices that are most relevant in your country or that you're specifically interested in learning about? So the partners have a chance to influence the context of the survey to make it relevant for your country. And there have been plenty of examples when we're going through them where it's like, no, that's not relevant, or make sure you get this, and this food's important, no, this one is not relevant to our country. So I would say in terms of the instruments, the baseline workshop is where you contextualize the household survey. As I was saying, the contractor gives an overview of the process. We break out into groups. We discuss the methodology, and there's also a next step. So we ensure that the room has consensus on where are we going from here? What information do I need from you as a partner to make sure I can finalize these things? And what are we going to be producing over the next couple weeks that we're going to then in turn give back to you? This is also where we start discussing custom indicators. And so I will say, somebody has commented on maybe they're not enough. I will say that we don't limit the number that partners can propose. We are caught, like as Arif said, it's a long survey, so we want to make sure that the survey doesn't become super long with another 10 custom indicators that ask a lot of questions, like the poverty module, for example. However, in many of these workshops, we get a list of indicators, custom indicators, and I'll use the example of Ethiopia with the mission indicators. The mission proposed some indicators. We went back and forth with the mission, and at the end of the day, we were able to say, and by we I'm meaning mostly the contractors, that what you're asking for is already covered in the questions that we're asking for these indicators that are already required by Food for Peace. So we consider that an achievement that, okay, we're not adding an additional 5 questions that the mission wants to include because actually we're getting that same data, maybe not like for the particular indicator, but we're getting the data that can then be used to calculate the mission's indicator in question. And so a very similar thing will happen with some of the partner indicators too, that they propose something that in the end, like we're going to get this data by asking this question so you can calculate the indicator yourself, or in fact, we're getting at what you're asking for in this particular indicator regardless. So I'll close that. During the baseline workshop, we talk about the qualitative process and the qualitative tools that will be used, but we don't really refine or contextualize those. That comes later. So right now with the Ethiopia program, we have just gone back and forth several times by giving out the qualitative instruments, asking the partners for input, asking the mission for input, making sure they're relevant and they're helpful. Are the questions worded correctly? Should they be changed? What are we getting at? And we also involve the partners in the qualitative site selection. One of the really important aspects for Ethiopia, because there are 4 projects, it's very large, and some of these projects are in the same areas that they have been before, is survey fatigue. So we want to make sure that we're not asking somebody to participate in a household survey and then 2 weeks later they're going to be approached for a qualitative study. So we identify the villages where the baseline study is going to be taking place. We tell the partners you cannot, we strongly advise you not to ask anybody in these villages, or not to select these villages for the qualitative study because there's a good chance these households have already been hit by a 4-hour survey. So partners are involved with winnowing down the sites to where these interviews are going to be taking place. So other ways that we have involved partners are with 4 corners calls. So we have the contractor provide an update once a month. Mission staff are involved. Headquarters partner staff are involved. We're involved. Field staff are involved. Sometimes there are connectivity issues that impede engagement and participation, but so far this year I've connected with all partners from all projects, field and headquarters, at least once during one of the monthly phone calls, which started probably, I think we had our first one April, maybe May. And then as somebody was just saying, the utilization workshop, Lisa referenced, which we piloted in Bangladesh. It seemed like really positive when we've institutionalized it as part of the Evelyn contract, and we'll be going out for both the evaluations and the baseline studies after we get the information or get the results to go back into country to figure out how do we use this better. And then I would just add that a couple of the last opportunities for engagement are reviewing some of the precursors to, documents to the report. So in Niger, we have a performance evaluation. We distributed the concept notes. The inception report was shared with the partners for comments. And then, of course, the draft baseline studies have been shared for widely for review. So I guess with that, I would pass it back to you now that you have a little bit of an understanding, or at least an overview of our attempts to engage partners. Is there anything specifically that you'd like to be interested in or engaged in, involved in, that I didn't mention, or any other ideas? And I see we have one right there.
Yeah, Mara, thank you very much for that. And there may have been changes in the last couple of years since the baselines for Bangladesh and Mali, which I was, although I wasn't like on the ground in the workshops, I know a lot about how the process of them. And in particular, I'm very familiar with what happened with the study in Mali, which was really quite interesting because once we got the baseline evaluation draft, it was clear that a lot of what was in that draft, the qualitative work that was in that draft, was actually captured through a lot of our studies in the first year that were, I mean, although it wasn't a refine and implement, we did 7 different studies. And a lot of, the findings from the baseline were similar to the findings from those studies. So I'm just, one of the things I actually mentioned to you, Arif, at the time was, is there some way with the refine and implement programs, because for the qualitative studies that the NGO conducts, to maybe take the place to some extent of the qualitative work that's being done by the contractor. But another part of it that was really valuable was the fact that the staff got into the field as well, which is something that we miss not being part of the baseline. So that was also something to keep, that was observed. Another point with regard to the baseline indicators was that it was not possible to measure systems level indicators, that only household level indicators can be measured. So if we want to do studies at a systems level, that would also be something that could be taken into account qualitatively. So, and just pretty much, even if it's not a refine and implement model, but if it's a regular model, there are some standard studies now that most of us are doing. So I think that should be reviewed with the IP. At the same time, I think it's also worthwhile that we have the opportunity to review some of the drafts and also provide feedback and so forth. So I mean, that process, I have to say, was extremely valuable. And how that manifests in terms of the final evaluation, I think we have to look at. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much about the update, and especially to hear about Ethiopia, because I support DRC in Ethiopia, and I had 2 different experiences, although I was not personally there in the baseline one, but I was there in the M&E workshop. So with DRC, we were very engaged with this back and forth on the tools and indicators, custom-made indicators that between USAID and us. So there was a lot of communication, which was extremely different than what happened in Ethiopia. We didn't even see the tool. So I believe, I don't know whether it's the same contractor or different contractors. So we don't know what exactly happened. But I really like the way DRC went with the process. But the one question that I have about on the DRC piece, because it's a refine and implement piece, and so we worked on the tool a couple of months back, but we are still working on a theory of change and indicator and refinement, and so by the time we finish the year, our log frames and the way our process is going on might look very different than what we had a couple of months back. And so the tool, how the whole baseline thing will sort of becomes, I don't know how much meaningful it would be by the time our indicators are ready or our log frames are ready.
Thank you. We have about 3 more minutes, and then it's going to be a hard stop because I want to turn it over to Arif for next steps, and we do need to be out of the room promptly at 12:30. So any other concrete suggestions on how you would like to be involved in the third-party baseline studies and final evaluation? Ways you're not involved that you'd like to be involved? Or things you heard Mara say that you haven't personally experienced and you want to understand how can this be true for my project?
Lisa from CRS. I just have a couple quick points from our recent discussions in the field. There was a suggestion that implementing partners have some mechanism to express objections or concerns based on a previous experience with a particular firm before a contract is signed. There was a request that the participation in enumerator training not be left to the discretion of the contractor, but that the PBO should always have that option. We're talking about having reviewed the 2016 guidelines. I'll leave it at that. I have more. I'll send them in.
And we can share it, though. I feel Diana, do you have I'd rather give, I mean, if there's time, I'll give it. Okay. But if others have suggestions, Mara wants to respond, and then we'll share.
Yeah.
It's off.
I will follow up with you after because you should have received that information, so I'll make sure you get it if it wasn't, or even if it was sent previously and you missed it, I'll make sure you get that. Lisa, your questions, I feel compelled to respond to, and they've now just both left my mind. What was the first one?
The first one was a mechanism to express concern about the selection of a firm.
Yes. Okay. So I think that there are 2 components to my answer. The first is sometimes we're a little bit limited by the quality of the data collection firms in country, and we're also limited by the amount that the contractor can spend on them. So I'm not sure that that is something that's always within our control, but if there are thoughts, of course, send them my way and send them to Arif. When we start something, and I think the best thing to do would be to ping us and say, hey, before this gets going, you do not want to work with this contractor. If they present this contractor to you, like red flag, and we can talk about that. That's asking a lot of you guys to take an initiative and remember, like, oh, ping Food for Peace. But like, we don't always know who the contractor is going to be until the process has started. So, but any input we get from you, any gossip, let us know about the quality of the contractors in country. The second, but relatedly to that, we did have an experience recently where the partner was very uncomfortable with the one of the consultants chosen to do some of the interviewing and lead a process. They reached out to us, and I think we responded very well by doing some switching of the consultants interviewing some of the other projects, and we chose not to remove the consultant just because the consultant had performed very well in other contexts. So, so if there are individual concerns with, oh gosh, like we're uncomfortable with this team leader or these particular individuals, please let us know that as well, and we can see what we can do. The second question was?
The second one was that it appears on page 60 of the 2016 guidance that the contractor has the discretion to allow or not allow the PBO to participate in enumerator training. And we didn't feel that should be
okay.
We have 1 minute to respond.
I would like to see that. I will follow, totally fine. I will follow up with you on that more specifically, but we have told the mission, at least for these years, and I believe in the past years too, that partner participation is encouraged in these trainings, and the contractor has actually requested that there be partner participation because there are some agricultural practices which they don't know how to explain, and somebody who lives in country does, and can help with the refinement of some of the phrasings of those questions.
Great, thanks so much. Arif, I'm going to be brief here. Thanks to all of you. We do want to dedicate the next couple minutes to next steps. If you have questions for Food for Peace.
Thank you. This has been great, and all the feedback that we heard, we will take that back, and we will try to address as much as possible with regard to indicator. As I just told, that the global food security strategy indicators are almost being finalized. You had an opportunity to provide feedback. So once they will be finalized, we will be revising our strategic indicator list that will have an implication on the indicator list that we have. And then all the feedback related to baseline, all the feedback related to the how we can encourage learning. We will definitely try to do our level best. We always struggle between how much guidance we like to put in and how much, because the more guidance you want us to put in, the less flexibility you will have at your end. So there is always this struggle that we would like to make sure that we do not want to be too invasive, but at the same time, we want, so, there is always, if you strongly feel that there is a guidance that is needed from Food for Peace, then we will definitely work on it. The suggested budget for monitoring particularly, that was when I was with TALK, that was the M&E people from all PBOs. They told, we need, yeah, Nestor was part of the team. We need a amount, suggested by Food for Peace. And when I moved to that aisle, I made it sure that, there is a suggested amount that we can propose. So, yes, if you feel strongly that there are things that you want us to be included in the guidance so that that budget or that many staff can be secured, please let us know and we will do that. But again, we like to make sure that we are not too invasive on your territory. That will make you less flexible, or that will allow less flexibility. So the next step in our end, we heard all of these, and I know that many of these discussions have been recorded. So we will take it back and we will discuss within Food for Peace team, and definitely we'll see when we revise our policy and guidance, M&E policy and guidance, you will see some of the differences that the feedback that you provided. Thank you.
Thank you, and much gratitude to Arif and the entire DC Food for Peace M&E team, even interns. We got the whole team in here today. So thank you for your commitment to listening to PBO concerns. Thank you to the online community for your patience and your input, and thanks to all of you in the room. I hope we have another event soon. It seems like there's plenty more to discuss. So we'll be in touch.
Thank you.